I'll start with a few points that I think are quite important, and one of the reasons why I kind of jumped at a chance to to do this talk. Okay, one of the most significant things here, I think, at least what struck me after I started reviewing the other myths about the elephant wife, because in my story it's a buffalo wife, but is that these myths are very old because they're spread throughout the Kalahari. Okay,
Mm,
in fact, they're spread all over southern Africa among
mhm,
many of the people,
yeah.
uh, of different groups of people who lived in this area. When I initially recorded this, I'm not a person whose mission was to record mythology. I did it as a sort of a side angle because I used to invite people from various neighboring camps to come to my camp for dinner. And sometimes I had, 40 or 50 people, whole families assembled with their children around the various fires. We all had, lots of food, and it was a really good time. And one of the reasons I did this, um, it wasn't just because I was a neighbor or an anthropologist trying to, get the people to relax around me. It was also because those were occasions when I could ask the the people who were storytellers, okay, to tell me their stories,
Yeah.
because it was interesting.
Mhm.
And it was something that I had observed being done on the several, although not very numerous occasions when I'd happened upon gatherings of this kind, ritual healings and things like that were usually accompanied by feasting and quite a large ceremonial gathering. And I was curious, I mean, I know Megan Beasley. I remember some of the mythology that she had collected.
Mhm.
I was familiar with some of the stories, and I just wondered how similar the Kwa stories would be to, other stories from this region. I'd also spoken at length with George Silverbauer about Tui stories. Okay, um, and the Tuikwe live um, kind of just abutting Kwa territory. It's to the northwest in the
Mhm.
Central Kalahari Game Reserve,
Mhm.
and some of his the mythology that he had collected seemed very similar to what I had heard. So I thought it was worth doing. Okay, so on this occasion, that's what happened. I asked a person called Ragai, who was a very, very good storyteller, if he could possibly tell one of the sacred stories. Okay. Now, just as a kind of background to this, I was interested in religious concepts, in creation myths and things like that, and um, there's a there had been an incident. This had been several months earlier, where actually Ragai's wife had died, and they were at another camp at the time, and I came into the camp to visit and discovered that it was empty. Okay, and I followed the tracks to the new camp, and they explained to me that there had been a death, and this woman had been buried underneath her hut, which was, I guess, the custom, uh, and then the whole camp had to be abandoned. And I was very curious about this because I had sort of, in my kind of brief questioning about what happened after death, I had been told that the the spirit, the essence of an individual, and this was true also of animals, would return to the realm of the creator, the unseen realm. Um, and and so I thought, well, why would they abandon the camp, right? And I was told it was because she was still there as a ghost. Okay, so I thought, oh, so there's a ghost and a kind of soul. And I was trying to sort of figure out what the thinking was on this. Okay, and I was asking a lot of questions and getting very confused by the answers. Okay, but apparently it was thought that until the body rotted away completely and was reclaimed by the earth, that the that the soul would wander around in confusion. And if people were around, the soul would try to interact with them, and that, or the ghost would try to interact with them, and that was not a good thing because it would prevent that individual from allowing their essence to return to the soil, to the Mother Earth. Okay, so eventually, I asked. It was actually a kind of fortuitous meeting. A man called Bekle. He's actually the father of the girl on the far right of the picture that you posted. You know. Anyway, he was a famous healer in the whole area. One of the I guess what some people would call a shaman. Okay, and I had seen him do many healing dances and so on and so forth. And so I thought he'll know, right? So he actually came to ask me for cigarettes, but I forestalled him and I said, I want to understand this about the ghost versus the soul, what happens after death and everything. And he absolutely stunned me in his answer. He said, how can we know anything but this matter? And he actually tweaked my arm, said, it's impossible to know because it's not given to us to know. So it may be there is nothing beyond death. There is no spirit. There is no creator. And I said, so what you're saying is you don't think God exists. I use the word in their language for it. And he said, so where are my cigarettes? And he refused to talk about it some more. But I came away from that feeling sort of astonished. Had I run into another agnostic or even an atheist? And he was a shaman? It was really astonishing. Okay. And what that speaks to, I think, is the prejudice that I had that assumed that these people, these hunter gatherers, in this very remote area, would all be very superstitious. Okay. That there would be no like deep thinking about, the nature of reality and the nature of, what's beyond our present reality and stuff. And here I'd come right up against somebody who'd obviously given it a lot of thought. Okay. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to solicit some of their most sacred stories. So I collected a few stories. It wasn't mythology wasn't my project when I was in the Kalahari. I was actually looking at um, the hypothesis that the hunter gatherers there were actually serfs, as that guy Zeiner had concluded 100 years earlier, of serfs of the Bakwena or the other Botswana tribes, serfs of the Kalahari, and whether the relationships functioned that way. And of course, in the end, I think that hypothesis was disproven, at least in my area, by the research that I did. Anyway, back to mythology. So I I was astonished when Ragai chose to tell the story of what he called the buffalo wife. Okay, and there are there's a history to these sacred stories where a human is married to an animal, all right, or someone who is designated as an animal. Megan Beasley collected stories of an elephant girl wife, remember? And similar stories have been recorded all over Southern Africa at various times. Elephant girl, okay? Um, so, I assume they substituted buffalo for elephant, but it doesn't really matter. There's an even older tale about, I think, an eland wife married to a jackal. In any event, what the stories in general seem to touch on is the idea that hunting an animal and eating meat is murder and cannibalism. All right. And that we have to, therefore, be very, very careful how we regard that whole practice of taking another life and eating the meat of that creature. Okay. Um, and that seems to be what the tale sort of speaks to. All right. And before I actually start the story, which I will shortly, I have to point out something else. I've reviewed almost all of the literature on this particular kind of sacred story, on Elephant Girl and so on. And one of the things that puzzles me is that in most of the stories, it's a tale of two brothers, okay, a younger brother and an elder brother, or else two men anyway, an older man who's married to, the elephant girl, and a younger man who then becomes the murderer of the elephant girl, the elephant wife. Okay. Now, in this story, what is really different, is that it is made explicit that the younger individual is actually the creator who's trying to teach the human a lesson, all right, about their role within the ecosystem. It has nothing to do with wives being seen as meat or cannibalism or anything like that. It has to do with love, all right? The fact that humans at some point in our evolution became hunters as well as consumers of plant material. It must go back that far to how to conceptualize doing that to another creature. All right. Um, I'm not sure about this, but that's the idea I'd like to throw out. Um, like the Guique tale in my story that was told to me, the uterine contents are are cut out of the wife, and the fetus is dropped on the ground, and the fluid, the water from the uterus, and sometimes the actual fetus, depends on the story, run all the way back to the parental camp from which that wife came to tell them what has happened to their sister or their daughter. Okay. And there's a crisis of retribution when the individual animals from that camp group together to come and kill the murderers. Okay, so those kinds of elements seem to be common with the Queequeg tale, but they don't occur in some of the other stories. All right. All right, so let me just begin the way that Ragai told it. I'll try and it's just kind of a literal translation, so there might be some parts. Oh, and there's one other thing. There's no there, God has no sex. All right, in the stories that I got. In other words, it's not referred to as male or female. It's the creator, right? Which is a sexless, genderless sort of essence, right? But when the creator takes the form of an animal or a person, or an animal person, whatever, um, of course, then they do have sex. They become male or female, depending, I guess, on what the purpose of the visit is. So when I refer to God in this account as male, okay, don't take that too seriously. All right. It's just a manifestation. So in this case, God appears as the younger brother of an older brother who's made a bad mistake and married an animal. Essentially, that's what the story tells. All right. Okay, so Ragai's tale. When God looked down, very tired after all the work of creation, he realized that the man he had created, who had been born of the woman he had created and had grown up in her care, had left his mother behind and married a buffalo and was now living among the buffalo people. He was very distressed. This was not the purpose that he had planned for these human beings. Okay, so he made himself into a fetus within the mother's womb and rushed through to birth and was in such a hurry. This is right in Ragai's tale, by the way. He was in such a hurry to get out that he actually ripped through the belly of the mother to be born, and then healed her with a look and explained to her that he was in a hurry because he had to correct an error that he had made. She got over her shock. Well, yes, I inferred that, and asked him why he was there. And he said, "Where is my brother? Where is my older brother?" And she told him that he was living now with the in laws, the buffalo people, in their camp many miles away. "Oh, mother," said God, "this is a mistake." And she was puzzled. She said, "Why would it be a mistake?" Says, "Ah, you don't understand yet." And he watched her as she was eating from the trees and digging in the ground for roots and eating them as they walked along. And he said, "Mother, I will return, but first I must go see my brother." And he walked on himself. Now you have to remember, this is an infant, right? So he's kind of sort of struggling along through the desert, and and coping with the conditions. And every time that um, this infant sneezed, flies appeared, insects. Okay. His hair was growing as he grew. He was continuing to eat the plants as he was going along. And he was growing and he was growing and he was growing bigger and bigger. And his hair started growing and it itched him. And so he was pulling big tufts of it out and throwing it in the air, and birds appeared. I guess he'd forgotten to create insects and birds the first time around. He kept going and he grew bigger and bigger and bigger, but he was finding it hard to get very far by constantly eating, okay, and looking for food. And so when he saw a giraffe, he slew the giraffe and cut the hide off the giraffe, cut much of the meat of the giraffe into pieces, and put it in the bag, put it in the bag with all the roots that he was collecting and all the plums and berries and so on, and carried it along. And as night fell, he got cold, and he he didn't know what to do at first, and he was shivering and shivering. So he wrapped himself in another part of the giraffe's skin, and he collected all kinds of little twigs and pieces of wood and so on from around the countryside as he went along. And he put them together in a pile and sparked a fire in them. Now, I just have to put in a little footnote there. I was also told in an earlier conversation that fire is one of the two things that are manifestations of the supernatural, of the other dimension. Okay. Fire comes from the realm of the God. It comes from elsewhere. It's not something that you can explain by looking at the life around you. That's what they told me. The other thing was love. Okay, so he made a fire, and he realized then that if he if he heated all the food that he'd brought on the fire, that he would warm up more quickly. He would warm his belly. So he did that. He cooked the meat, he cooked the vegetables, and while they were heating up and cooking, he was eating the berries. Okay. And when his stomach was full of warm food, he hung the meat in the branch above the fire and let it dry out so it would be lighter to carry it the next day. And so he progressed day after day after day, growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Every day he gathered vegetables. Some days he killed an animal and took its meat. Every night he built a fire and sheltered next to the fire and covered himself with the skin. And finally he reached the camp, the home of the buffalo people. And he looked down on the great plain and he saw all of them lying down, chewing their cud, I guess. And in the distance, he spotted a little human figure next to a buffalo. And he went over and introduced himself. Hello, I'm your brother. I've come to meet you. Our mother sent me. And the young man was overjoyed to meet his brother. And then God said, "Let me show you something." And he started a fire and he cooked what he had gathered that day. And he was, in the meantime, introduced to his sister in law, this great big placid buffalo, and noticed almost immediately that she was with child. She was pregnant. And he complimented her, he complimented his brother on this. And they all ate together, although the buffalo was not pleased with the taste of the meat from her cousin, the giraffe, and didn't touch it. However, she ate the berries, she ate some of the cooked vegetables, didn't like them very much, but, was polite. And so they slept. And the next morning, he proposed to his brother and his sister in law that they should travel back to the camp of their mother, the human mother, to tell her the good news about the baby to come. And so they were agreeable. And so the three of them set off in the direction of the place of the where the human mother was. And they traveled for several days like this. And on the, I think, third day or fourth day, they came to where there was a big termite mound. And the younger brother, God, said to the older brother, "Oh, please, I have not gathered enough firewood. Could you go get firewood and we'll start a fire," as was the daily custom. Okay. So the elder brother went off, and then the younger brother turned around and killed the buffalo wife. Now, I have to tell you, I was watching this story be told, right? And all around the camp, there were children listening. And the shock on the faces of the children was something I'll never forget. They just couldn't believe this. He killed her. How could this happen? Okay. So Ragai's story went on. He said, and he immediately began to butcher her, cut strips of meat off her, hung some in the trees. And the older brother came back with his load of wood and saw what had happened and was absolutely horrified. What have you done? You've killed my wife. And God said, Alas, I'm sorry. She's not dead, really. She's with me. Her spirit is here. But you made a mistake. This is not a wife. This is meat. And now I'm going to show you how to cook it and taste it. And you have tasted meat of something else, I guess the giraffe. So the younger brother was still in shock, but he set about kind of helping. The older brother was still in shock, but he set about helping his younger brother set up the fire and cook some of the meat. And they ate together. And the older brother said, But what of the child? And God said, Well, this too must die. You do it. Cut her open. And so the older brother, compelled, sliced open the side of his wife, and out gushed the uterine fluid and the little fetus, which died in his hands. And he was weeping at this point, weeping. And the fluid ran off across the dunes, and it ran back. It flowed back to the camp of the buffalo people, and it told them what had become of their sister and daughter. And the buffalo people were appalled, and they resolved to track down the murderers. Meanwhile, the two brothers had cut up all the meat. They'd made another bag out of the skin of the buffalo wife to carry everything in. And they were just settling down in the next evening to sleep before returning westward to the land where their mother was. And then they heard a distant thunder. Many, many hooves were coming their way. So the younger brother said, it is the buffalo people. They are coming to seek revenge on us for consuming their sister and their daughter. And the younger brother started shaking with fear. And he said, And rightly so. What are we to do? And God said, Let me handle this. And he opened the termite mound, shoved his brother inside, and closed it again and waited. And when the buffalo people arrived, they ran back and forth. They circled the fire, a little bit afraid to get too close to it. But they were furious, and they snorted and they charged. And 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 God said, Wait, let me tell you. She's safe with me in heaven, in the place beyond all this material world. She's not gone. She's only gone from the material world. Now, you made a great mistake by accepting a human man as a husband to one of your daughters. And it's because he didn't smell right. And now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to show you what a human predator, a hunter, smells like. Now, God, of course, had eaten a whole lot of meat in the last few days. And so when he began to fart, it was pretty potent. At this point, by the way, Ragai started to make sound effects, like this. And the kids who had been in shock, right, they started to laugh, the children all around the camp. And the farts were so obnoxious and stank so badly that they were actually poisonous. And many of the buffalo people dropped poison unconscious to the ground. And the others gradually backed away and went to a distance and decided that they were not going to have, anything more to do with this, and they were just going to go home. So eventually, when all was quiet again, God opened the termite mound and said, "You can come out now." And his older brother looked around and said, "What have you done?" God said, "I haven't killed them. They're just unconscious. We can get away now." Why would I kill them? I wouldn't kill them. But here is the thing. When we eat the wife, when we eat the meat, you must say a prayer of thanks for this sustenance. And I will teach you that. I will teach you the prayer. And it goes like this. Thank you, beloved, for sharing your strength with us, for giving us your power that we may live, that we may survive. Now go to the door of heaven and wait for me there. I will join you soon enough, and we will be together again forever. Does that make sense? And believe it or not, I actually witnessed that ritual on a couple of occasions when I was allowed to follow uh, after a hunt when they tracked down an animal to kill it when it had been. Is the sound okay? Where the poison, the sort of nerve poison that they used with their arrows, had caused the animal to go and lie down. Okay. Um, I actually saw them when the animal was killed, usually with a cut to the neck to bleed out. They all gathered around it and they said exactly that. Thank you, my sister or brother, for the gift of your strength that we may live. Go to the door of heaven. I will meet you there, or we will meet you there, and we will be together again forever. And I thought that was so beautiful. It still makes me almost cry, because compassion is all you have left when you're killing an animal for meat. You know? The unity of life is what needs to be acknowledged, and it's love, as if it's your own child, as if it's your own wife or your own husband that you're seeing dead before you. So the two brothers then picked up their sacks of food, of meat and vegetables, and went to join their mother. When they got there, she was overjoyed to see them, but surprised that the buffalo wife was not with them. And they explained what had happened and that her meat was in the sacks. And after her initial shock, she too tasted the meat and found it good. She also was surprised and pleased to learn about fire, to learn about cooking, to learn about the warmth at night. And she was especially delighted with the sacks because that would allow her to go about and gather all the necessary food, the wild plants and so on, and put them in the sack and come home and not waste all day eating in the plains, she wasn't eating all day, so she could come home, be near a fire, and stay warm and have cooked food. And God said, "This is how you must live, and you must also eat meat sometimes when one of our creatures that we have created in this world offers itself. Eat the meat; it will make you strong." But eat the meat with thanks. Eat the meat with compassion, because it is all part of the sacred realm that this creation represents. And if you do not, if you depart from love and compassion, and you do not treat other creatures as your brothers and sisters, as your husbands and wives, as your own children, and treat them as sacred, then you have departed from the path I set you on, and it will all come to naught. What I found, okay, that was basically the end of his story. Um, what I found really remarkable about this was that Ragai said very clearly that this was the single most sacred story of the people. Okay, and it defines the beginning not only of the use of fire for cooking and warmth and shelter, but of in essentially the sort of hunting and gathering way of life. But it even goes further than that, because it's the beginning, as it were, of sacredness, you know, and it sets up um, the predator's imperative in humans is not like in lions or other animals. It comes out of necessity, tempered by compassion. That's how it was intended to be, according to this story, you know. And I call it the kind of the basic imperative that actually prevents murder, real murder of people by other people, because when you think about it, when does it become okay for people to kill for sport, to kill for fun? Look at a bullfight. That teaches children watching it to view the torture and killing of an innocent creature as entertainment. And they glorify the bullfighter, the matador, right? The sport hunter who displays this creature that he's killed and gets Facebook likes because of it, you know, who goes out and sees himself as um, having done something praiseworthy because he's managed to blast some poor elephant or lion out of existence. Like, when did that begin? And I've got my own sort of um, shall we say hints about that, and I think it begins when people are trying to teach children that it's okay to overcome compassion and love and kill for fun. Okay. And that's when you get children trained to kill other people too. And that's what the Bushmen said. They said, if you praise the hunter and make the hunter feel like he's above everybody else for having killed, then someday he may kill a person too. This sense of hubris, of arrogance that comes with being applauded for being cruel and deadly to another creature. That's not something to be applauded. It's not something to be recommended as a positive personality trait. It's hard. It's hard to be a hunter. That's what I was told. The worst thing, one young man actually admitted this to me. He said the worst thing he'd ever experienced was that moment when he was trying and trying and trying to let the arrow fly towards this innocent animal who was just looking at him, you know, to actually kill another creature. It's something, when you think about how children behave towards animals, even little insects and so on, most children are tender, fascinated. They love little kittens and puppies, and they love looking at animals. All of our mythology, about stories about little mice, stories about little bears, stories about Bambi, stories about other creatures are part of children's folklore, and we make them seem very close to human in their emotions. We use young animals in fairy tales almost as proxies for young humans. Mickey Mouse, for instance. Think about it. Bambi. And when we turn that around and make it possible for children to um, imagine making themselves bigger by killing these creatures,
Mm.
then I think that's a major turning point in a human culture when that begins to happen. And there are rituals like the bullfight, like the fox hunt, like the going hunting with my dad and getting a big moose or something. Like all of these rituals of the kill, that make it into entertainment, make it into a proof of manhood, I think take a turn in a very, very dangerous direction. Because once you do that, you can also dehumanize people and turn killing people into entertainment, or at least a necessity. And you think about it, at people who are from cultures where there has uh, been normalized the idea of warfare, where you go out and kill people and steal from them and things like that. I think they couldn't do it unless they had mythology that, um, in a sense, buffered children from the horror that is. Think of all the war movies and war stories. King Arthur and everything. All these stories about the deeds of warriors. Starting with like things like David and Goliath and so on. I mean, you know what I felt when I heard that story the first time? I felt really sorry for Goliath. I thought, well, he wasn't expecting that. He was probably pushed into using his strength to hurt others because that's the only way that people would accept him. If he was really a giant, he probably had some something wrong with his adrenal gland or something, you know, and or growth hormone levels or something. And couldn't they just sit down and discuss it and become friends? What was stopping that? You know, the story about uh, how a supposed god helped the Jewish people escape Egypt. I mean, did he have to really kill every firstborn? Excuse me, kill all these other, like, I don't know. I found actually, the whole idea of a ritualized cannibalism, which is part of one of the explanations that has been given for these Bushman stories. That that the wife as meat is a kind of a story of ritualized cannibalism. That's completely different from the story, my interpretation of the story that I was told. And yet there's a young woman, just let me see if I can find her here. Yeah, I had downloaded a PDF of her talk. I'll just give you her name. Hang on. It's Nadine Howard. Okay. And Nadine Howard did an MA thesis at the University of Natal using many of these stories, reviewing many of these stories. But none of them, none of the ones that she reviewed seemed to uh, uh, identify the younger brother as God, right? Um, yeah. And
Title. Do you have a title for that thesis?
just a moment, let me see. I think it's Patterns of Belief in Bushman Creation Tales, an interpretive study relating to Klam, Maluti, and Juntwasi sources. Sorry.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's one of these things. I mean, she goes on about how it's a story about cannibalism, the wife as meat, and so on. And I really have my doubts that these stories, you know, really represent that. But anyway, did you get that title?
Roughly. I've just
I
typed it
can
out.
send, yeah,
I'm
I
not
can
sure if it's
send you
correct,
the
but anyway,
PDF.
you can, yeah, you can send that.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
No, it's one that really troubled me. I mean, she did her best to go over all the possible implications and meanings, and the whole interpretation of it as a story about the relations between men and women, or the
Right.
the idea of the wife, being a killable meat source, that kind of thing. And I mean, in the light of the story that I had understood, that was really, really a bit of a shock to me.
That is really reductive. That is really
Yeah,
literalist. I
it
don't
is.
think that's getting it. There is a lot of metaphor here that I
Yes,
don't
there
think
is.
that's getting.
It's an enormously deep area of metaphor, actually. I mean, the story that Megan Beasley recorded of the
Yeah,
elephant wife
the elephant,
is
right.
quite different. Although in some of the versions that George Silverbauer told me about, the elephant wife was pregnant, and um, her fetus and the uterine waters did run off to the elephant people, and so on. And that tale does come up now and then, but in fact, none of the stories that she reviewed in her MA, and none of the stories that Megan, um, recorded, to my knowledge, identified the younger brother as God.
Right.
And that really impressed me. I mean, it shocked me in a way, because why are these stories sacred?
Mm, mm.
Hmm?
Yeah. Why is the story sacred when
Yeah,
there's all the
yeah,
God is farting and being
yeah,
obnoxious? I mean, it's
yeah.
really
Well,
very interesting.
exactly. The logic of creation, the logic of the sacred includes um, predation. Yeah, as something that humans started to do. So how do you account for that? I mean, when you think about it, all of these people, uh, like 200,000 years of living in Africa, right? In this part of Africa, they would have known about predation. They would have understood about it. Sorry, somebody's leaving little messages without talking, and I'd be interested to to have people actually say those out loud. Is there any way to do that?
And so some
Invite
people,
commentary. Sorry.
There should be a
we can have
chat.
discussion, and there's it's the chat. Yeah.
Chat. Yeah,
at,
my
at the bottom
okay,
of
wait
the
a minute.
screen.
There?
Yeah,
Oh my
it's a
goodness.
chat function at the bottom of the Zoom.
Oh yeah. I found it.
And somebody's found the actual reference for the Nadine Howard. Very kind of them, Robin.
Oh, good. Okay.
And Dasha was just talking about Native American traditions as well for plants, not only animals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe Dasha
Yes.
would like to say something.
The chat is actually quite useful.
Yeah, it gives people the chance to get references and so forth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, this reference to the work of Robin Kimmerer is very, very interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
And, you know, I actually was told something quite similar, just sort of in a sort of offhand remark once. I had done an interview, an extensive interview with some people near a borehole, some Kwa people near a borehole in the beginning of my field work. And at the end of the interview, um, uh, one of them came to me and said, it was very nice, you know, meeting you, and we were very interested in your work, because I told them that I was recording their culture and all of their lives, and trying to help understand their way of life. And they said, but did you have to do the interview under this very unfortunate tree? And I looked up at the tree and I said, what's unfortunate about it? Can't you see? And all of a sudden I realized, like, much of the tree was parasitized by orchids, you know, these wild plants. And the tree was dying. There were so many, you know, of these orchids on the tree, that they were kind of sucking the vital sap out of it for their own reproduction. And I hadn't even noticed, you know, but his point was that the tree would have experienced our gathering, and it was already in distress, and it was unfair for us to impose, you know, all this human babble and disruption and sit around on top of its roots, and you know, for that length of time. That poor tree was suffering, and I hadn't even noticed, right? And I thought about it later, and it occurred to me, you know, most of the time, um, we tend to think of, um, you know, the unity of life, the sort of circle of life, and all the rest of it. We often don't include plants, but the Kwa did. I assume most of the hunter gatherers do. And in fact, later on, when Ragai was telling me all about why it was the principal work of men, wasn't even hunting. You know what it was? It was taking care of the ecosystem. And one of the biggest roles that they had in taking care of the ecosystem was in preventing really hot wildfires. And, you know, I didn't grasp all of it initially, but, and in fact, it took me years to realize that there's actually sound scientific basis for some of the things that he told me. We're recreating this knowledge now. But I remember one day he was explaining that the plants and what lives in their roots, and I guess he meant fungus and so on, because later on he lifted it up and showed me, is the skin of the mother. And he said, if the fire gets too hot, it will not only kill the living trees, which is just something you got to prevent, right? But it will actually destroy the skin of the mother, and nothing will live there for a long, long time. It's only recently that research by soil scientists has confirmed that very hot, intense wildfires will actually cause arsenic release into the soils. You know, arsenic will be sort of liberated from its chemical bonds and poison the soil, you know. And he knew, you know, I mean, when he lifted up these tufts and he showed me this root mass, you know, and all these fungal networks under the soil, and all these little critters running around underneath the soil, he was just trying to say, this is the skin of the mother, and we have to protect her. Okay, it wasn't just about protecting the hunter-gatherer human camps from wildfire risks. It was also about protecting the entire ecosystem from this very, very dangerous kind of wildfire. You know, when you think back, like what what did what did- what did we go through in Africa at this time? I don't know about the rest of Eurasia, but people in Africa went through a horrendous set of what are called mega droughts,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and they only ended about 73 or 74,000 years ago. There were, I think, four major ones, and they were so intense that virtually all of the main lakes and rivers in Central Africa, Lake Malawi is where some of the first research was done, but it's been confirmed in other lake systems as well. They dried up. They were like little saline puddles every time one of these mega droughts occurred. Well, what do you think happened to the landscape then?
Yeah.
Fires. We saw it in Australia, you know, we saw it in California. We're seeing it now around the world with climate change. These fires are dangerous. They kill not just living trees and people and animals, but they kill the skin of the mother, you know, and what we know now about the indigenous knowledge that underwrites the legitimacy of the fire prevention regimes, you know, making fire breaks, doing very light, cooler burns in patches all over the place, right? That was
Sure.
done based on scientific understanding of the
Oh, yeah.
consequences of very, very hot wildfires. You know, it might be the very first science of mankind.
Yeah,
And
well,
it's
they're
been completely
showing
overlooked.
some evidence from the late Middle Pleistocene for
Mhm.
Neanderthals on this.
Yes,
So
yes, exactly.
they're
So it's
using
ancient.
fire
Yeah,
breaks and fire.
yep.
Yeah, it
In Central
probably is
Europe.
really ancient.
Yep.
Yeah,
And so
Germany.
how did we evolve, we humans? Okay, so we have this mixed hunting and gathering economy. One. Two, you know, bipedal, fire, control of fire. And obviously some kind of cognitive system that incorporates symbolic communication so we can discuss things and come up with explanations about what's going on in the world. Otherwise, how did they ever come up with the how to prevent wildfires? That had to be a long process of learning and discussion and experimentation and so on
Sure.
that went on for over 100,000 years, right? Before they came up with what worked. Okay. And so culture, you know, our second sort of adaptive system of modifying our behavior so that we can survive in various environments, that was part of this, right? And these sacred stories, they're ways of communicating mostly to children how to see the world, how to perceive the world. Okay. And that's what always struck me about these kinds of myths.
Hmm. Shall we ask people if there's questions or ideas about the
Mhm.
stories? Do you feel like opening some discussion on that, Helga?
Yeah. I don't mind at
would,
all.
would you like to say any more? Or would you finish off on that?
Yeah.
Is that a hand up, Chris?
Well, yes, it's
Chris,
just that,
is that your hand up?
yes, it is my hand up. Yeah, it's just that Camilla, before you spoke, Helga, and well, before I say anything, let me just say I don't think I've ever been quite so powerfully moved by a story as this evening. That story, just I don't know, the way you spoke, the way you told it, as well as the content, was just so painfully moving. So thank you so much. But before Steve, just about a couple of hours ago, Camilla's sort of instructed me to look up Megan Beasley's story of the Elephant Girl.
Mhm.
So I did read that first before hearing you,
Mhm.
and there, as well as the story, Megan has some comments on it, and she talks about the enormous amount of fat on the elephant girl who God kills. and relates that to the fattening which is expected of a girl when she's in menstrual seclusion. She's supposed to get fat. That's sort of one of the main points of her being there. And of course, we know from the eland bull stories that the eland bull has an enormous amount of fat, and the girl in the hut needs to get equally fat, and all that stuff. And also, of course, in that story, there's this motif of the blood kept by the grandmother in a little bottle, through which the dead elephant girl is brought back to life. So I'm just wondering, could you say anything more about the connections between these different myths, and how you explain those connections? I'm really saying, because Ian Watts is here, and of course Camilla's convening this session, we've always been in RAG particularly interested in this one way of kind of solving these problems of male violence using what are often called, man the tool maker, and we too often forget these so-called tools were sort of weapons of mass destruction, and we've always been interested in the way in which respect for blood, prohibitions on spilling blood, whether women's blood or animal blood, was part of the solution to the problem of murder and cannibalism, which you so beautifully reminded us of. So perhaps could you just say anything more about how you see some of those connections, and whether you agree with Megan Beasley's the analogies she makes?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about Megan's story, particularly the inclusion of red ochre that she that the mother puts all over the growing elephant girl replica, and so on. I think the interesting thing here is that blood, because women menstruate and have blood, at least 4 or 5 times in a lifetime, according to the informants that I asked in the Kalahari. It's not as regular as it is in our society, because women have very long periods of lactation, right? But the importance of that, the blood is associated with life. It's associated with the sacred, and the anything that is that color, that red color, it kind of gets corralled in with this almost sacred category of beings or of substances. And so life blood, we have that expression in English, and there's a reason for that. I think it's not mysterious, but you see what it also tells us is that when a hunter kills an animal, he causes it to bleed, right? He takes its life with its blood away, right? And the awareness that women give birth with blood, there's blood involved in them being fertile in the first place, that I think it gives rise to some of these mythological connections. I'm not sure all of them make sense to me, right? But here's the thing, these stories are inventive, right? I mean, none of this really happened, right? So the mythology is an attempt to make sense of various aspects of the world out there, okay? That even including a creator spirit, that thing that turns into, because of course what Ragai didn't tell me that first time he told the story was that God went back into non-reality, like into his real reality, which is not the material world, by first turning into a bird and jumping on a stick. Okay. And I thought that's weird, but the idea is that birds can fly up into the trees, and then they can actually fly up into the air and just disappear over the horizon. That's the sort of imagery that calls up. Okay. The idea that there is something out there You know, you look out at the night sky and you see all these constellations. You look up and there's the sun coming up and there's the moon in the other direction sometimes, you know, usually. And so you have this tremendous interest in the cycles of nature and in the cycles of the universe out there. And you dream up all these explanations for it because children come to you and say, but why? Why? All the time. Right? And so people come up with inventive stories. And I think some of these myths, they were very satisfying to, you know, a particularly inventive storyteller. So they got repeated and repeated and repeated and modified and added to and ameliorated and so on over thousands of years. And you know, who knows when the first story of a you know, animal wife was told. It's probably more ancient than we can possibly imagine.
Mm.
I think little Neanderthal children were told such stories.
Right, very
You know, I think
possible. Yeah.
it goes way back.
Ian, you might have some idea about how old are these stories. What do you reckon?
Okay. First of all, a question. Well, two questions. One, in one of Megan's stories, it's a story about a very similar birth, an identical birth. The infant jumps out of its mother's womb, and she immediately treats him with red ochre, or redwood, actually, because Megan's changed her mind that a lot of this was actually redwood rather than ochre. And just recently, I've come across an identical trope in a Baka story, all the way over in, you know, sort of Western Congo Basin. Unfortunately, I don't know, haven't been able to track down the full mythological context of that story. And right now, I can't even remember in Megan's story how I mean, clearly it's part of the same complex of stories as you've just told. I can't remember the details of it either. And maybe you can jog our memory. The other question I had was, when you say he as he's traveling along and he creates the flies and other insects, and
Sneezes.
Sorry?
Sneezes. He
Sneezes.
sneezes. Yeah. Achoo!
Oh yes.
Right.
Did he sort of say what kinds of other creatures, insects or whatever?
No, I probably should have stopped, but I didn't, you know, I didn't remember to ask afterwards. But basically, the implication was that God was very tired during creation and didn't get around to creating any insects, and that this little excursion to correct an error that was made. Before I end that, one thing I have to say is Ragai did add that God had another correction to make when he got back, when the two brother, you know, when he came back to the camp with his brother, he realized that he should have created some human females. In other words, other families, you know. So he created a bunch of other families with daughters and sons, and so that the randy young man who was the first man, you know, coming out of the womb of the first woman, which makes an interesting variation on the rib story. But anyway, that person wouldn't be reduced to falling in love with an elephant or a buffalo or anything, right? He obviously wanted to have sex, right? And couldn't do it with his own mother. He's not a rabbit, right? So, you know, he chose, you know, a beautiful cow or a beautiful elephant female. And the idea that the impulse to reproduce would be something that God would kind of overlook at the time, even though he put it into all these other animals for humans. I think, is due to the understanding that God was really tired and didn't get around to it yet. And I think there's a lot of kind of humor in this, because obviously birds, he plucks hair out of his head, throws it in the sky, and that's where the birds come from. Okay. He sneezes, and then, and I won't even tell you what Ragai, so I kind of left out the bit about peeing and creating rivers, never mind number 2. But anyway, so, the whole idea is that a lot of the world is explained because God had to come back into it to rectify some stupid mistakes that were made in the beginning, which is an interesting variation of a creation story, I must say. I found it very humorous. But the best stories, the best myths, the best explanations even are satisfying, partly because they make you feel warm and humorous or incite your emotions. Okay. And this story was emotional as well as humorous. I think that's why it survived so long. By the way, Megan's story also had a termite mound with a brother. Yeah. And I can't remember about the poisonous farts.
Well,
I'll have to look.
I can remember. I've got it in front of me.
Oh,
Do you
good.
want me to say something?
Yeah.
Because there's like an opposite kind of motion in the Megon story, the elephant wife, because with the Kwa story, the Ragai story, the god, he's growing and growing, eating and growing and growing, and eventually killing animals. And he, when he does the murder, he then gets has to defeat the buffaloes with the poisonous farts.
Yeah.
If you look at the elephant wife story, when after the elephant wife's been killed and the drop of blood goes back to the grandmother keeps it in the pouch, and she nurtures it, and it grows and grows and grows. So it's like now the elephant wife is growing and growing and growing. And when the brothers find her again, all beautiful on the mat with the redwood and the beautiful, like a girl out of menstrual seclusion, because Megan refers to the Python girl as well. And then she goes along with the brothers. They come to the termite mound, and they go all the way back to their mother's camp, the brothers' camp. And she says, "Let me wait behind because I need to powder myself." When they reach the camp, and what she has is a hemspock horn. She uses a horn, which I suppose that the horn would also make farty type of noises. I'm not sure.
It would.
That's
so
true.
It would be.
using a horn.
Yeah. Well, one
It'll
humor,
be some sort of raspy type of
it's
noises.
interesting.
So that's what she's got. And there's one other story that also has. So there's a kind of equivalence of and what happens then when she makes those noises is all the brothers' camps people lie down and as if they fall over. Like, so they are like doing what the buffalo people do with the poison farts. So we've got the elephant girl can do what God with the Kwa stories can do.
That makes
pretty
sense.
much.
Can I say 2 things? One thing I'd forgotten to mention, Ragai's parting line here at the end of the story. I don't know why I forgot this, but he said the moral of the story, as it were, said, "So remember, everyone, never fart in front of your in-laws." I'm not kidding.
Perfect.
It was a real rule, though. You had to be very respectful to your in-laws.
Absolutely.
Address them with special treatment. Well, never fart. And I'm sure none of the children would ever forget that. Okay,
I think
and
that's what it was probably about.
yeah. Come to think of it. Okay, but the other thing you asked about ochre, red, and I completely forgot this. But the Kwa used ochre when they could get it, and you know what it was? It's an antiseptic and an anti-inflammatory. right? And so you get scratches all over your legs, mosquito,
Right.
insect bites, mites and things like that, things that flea bites. And that's what you use ochre for. You cover your whole body in it if you can, because it takes the sting away and prevents infection. Ochre is sacred.
Right.
The fact that it's red
Yes.
just helps with the association.
It's red and it's sacred, but it's also good medicine.
Yeah, of course.
Ian,
And,
did you want to say anything there?
What's that?
Well, we have the
I
world's
was just wondering, Ian wanted to say anything.
we have the world's archaeological specialist on the ochre record of human evolution in Ian, but I don't know what. But we have got two people's hands up, Camilla, Manchego
Yeah,
and
we've got two people waiting, but maybe Ian can come back again. Okay, brilliant. But Manchego, do you want to have a go? Do you want to have a question?
I don't hear anything.
Manchego?
Manchego,
Unmute. No, you're not unmute.
There we go.
Try
I
again.
wanted to make the observation that Helga is probably aware of, that at last go, there's a symbol in there that some people are calling the oldest ever, which is associated with a hunting scene of a bird on a stick.
That's interesting.
It's at Lascaux, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can we find that picture? Can we find that picture?
What's happening is that the man, the mighty hunter, is actually being defeated by this huge wounded bull, and there's this little bird on a stick, which presumably signifies movement into the other world in some way. But it's marvelous that it's on the point of a stick, just as in your story, Helga.
This is the cave painting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think it's a representation of the buffalo wife.
Yes, that's a marvelous thought. Marvelous thought.
Yeah.
So I mean, look at where that buffalo is.
It's a
losing.
perfect illustration of
sticking out.
buffalo one.
Yes, yes, Helga, you are absolutely right. There's no question that Bison Woman is a huge threat, as is Buffalo Woman, and it's far more powerful than the man, the hunter, who's obviously dying, even though he's got an erect penis. So, yes, I think that's a brilliant insight. Yes, yeah.
Kept being reminded of the white buffalo calf woman of the Blackfoot, and I really couldn't figure out exactly why, but so I'm going to go back and figure it out.
Oh, this is fun, isn't it? Yeah.
Mary's got your hand up. Mary?
Oh, hi. I don't know why I can't put the camera, sorry. Thank you so much, Helga. It was just so wonderful to hear you. I think I was one of the lucky people who received the text before you told it to us. Camilla sent it to a few of us before, and in the written version, when the little god who wants to set off to find his brother, on his way to find his brother, he eats a lot of plants, and the only animal thing you mentioned that is eating is actually the termites. So when you told the story tonight, you didn't mention that bit, but I'm very interested in that bit that he's eating all the termites from the Great Mound, and so he follows the Great Mound, where precisely he's gonna hide his brother later in the story. So I only saw a termite mound once in my life. It was big enough, but I was just wondering if the termite mound, once it's hollowed, would it become a little bit reddish? So once you go into it, I mean, imagining that you can go fully into the termite mound, would you become a little bit red, as if you had blood on it? And the other thing I was thinking of is when his brother leaves after he has hidden in the termite mound and he lives. He is kind of, it's almost like a second life because he's going to learn something. It's like a little, oh, how do you call that? An initiation. He's going to be initiated to the meat. So then I couldn't help thinking of Maria Gimbutas and the Kogan culture and the mount as a structure. And the way in some mythology, I'm thinking Ireland and Circassian about some tales where the hero is hidden by a foster family, is hidden precisely from his in-laws, from his brother's fathers. So we have also, you said 2 brothers, but in the tale of Circassian is actually 99 brothers he has. And the young hero, the young baby is hidden in the mound by his foster family. And when he leaves the mound, he is ready to accomplish whatever he was destined for. So I just couldn't help thinking of the entire Kogan culture. And it's the first time I actually hear I mean, it's just so lovely to hear a tale from Africa where somebody hides in the mound. I think it's just a comment. I don't really have a question, but I'd love to hear more about it, of course. Thank you,
Mary, thank you. I actually forgot that part. Yeah, as he's walking along, he actually eats out termite mounds, not just one, but several, you know, he eats all the termites out of the mound. And I'd forgotten that. Yeah, you're right. And it was undoubtedly one of these emptied out termite mounds that figures in the story. The whole idea of hiding someone, you know, putting them in a hiding place to prevent danger is very interesting, and that is a kind of transformative, you know. I mean,
yes, transformative.
Yeah, and you know, girls being put in a menstrual hut to get fat, you know, that's part of that whole tradition. Okay, well, I think we're at the end of our hour and my dogs have suddenly shown up. So
dogs are showing up, yeah.
so my husband must be back.
So much. If we've got to let the dogs have you back. With a lot of thanks, with a prayer for thanks.
That was fun.
Thank you so much for that magical storytelling. It was wonderful. And just to say everybody's appreciation and so very wonderful to have you here again. And I hope we're going to hear more of these stories in future. Next week, I'm just going to let everybody know for next week, we have more African stories again, with a focus particularly on the things she knew, women's civilizing influence in African folklore and mythology. And this is from the wonderful young Cameroon scholar, Helen Nde, who runs a wonderful Twitter thread called Mythological Africans. And so we're going to be hearing a lot more of these stories for anybody who can make it next week. But this has been a very special story indeed. Thank you so much, Helga.
Thank you for letting me talk.
And
thank you very much.
Yes, marvelous.
Thanks everybody for coming along. It's been great to have you.
Okay,
See you next. Thank you. See you next week.
Okay, bye.
See you next week, everybody.